Hey guys, welcome back. 37 brand new polls released over this past day, 36 of them relating to Super Tuesday states. Going to start with the national poll and then just dive right in to those Super Tuesday polling numbers. Some really interesting data to go through. Later on tonight, when we start getting the vote numbers in for the Super Tuesday states, I'll be periodically updating you guys on exactly how the race is going. So if you want to continue to get updates going through primary season, and you have not already done so, consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. So starting off here, this is an Ipsos national poll, and actually some pretty positive signs here for Bernie Sanders. This poll was taken between February 28th through March 2nd, so during a period of time where Joe Biden has seen a bit of a bump in his numbers, but at least in this national poll anyways, still showing Bernie Sanders leading the way. With all respondents, he was at 23%, and then in second place, Joe Biden and Michael Bloomberg were each at 13 percentage points respectively, with Elizabeth Warren at 9. And then you take a look at just the Democratic registered voters, and Sanders is up there at 29%, followed by Biden at 18, Michael Bloomberg at 15, and Elizabeth Warren at 10. And then going down and taking a look at the head-to-head hypothetical matchups that we could be getting here between Bernie Sanders and Michael Bloomberg, as well as Bernie Sanders versus Joe Biden. And he has the head-to-head matchup lead. With all respondents, he had a 10-point lead over Bloomberg, and he had an 18-point lead among registered Democratic voters. And then with Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders had an 8-point lead among all voters, and then a 4-point lead among those registered Democratic voters. So we'll see how all this plays out. After Super Tuesday, this could potentially consolidate into a two-person race between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. We'll have to see if that ends up being the case or not. So now moving into the rest of the polls here, 36 polls coming from Super Tuesday states. Starting off here with a few elucid polls, starting with the state of Colorado, a sample size of 561 likely voters. And for brevity's sake, I'm not going to be touching on the candidates who have dropped out of the race, those being individuals such as Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Tom Steyer, among others. Just going to focus on really the top four candidates at this point in time, being Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, as well as Michael Bloomberg. So in these results here, Colorado, we have Bernie Sanders leading the pack at 34%, followed by Warren at 14%, Joe Biden at 10%, and Michael Bloomberg at 9%. North Carolina, the sample size was 657 likely voters. Very close at the top here, Sanders leading at 26%, Biden at 25%, Bloomberg at 15%, and Elizabeth Warren at 12%. And then we have a Texas poll, sample size of 833 likely voters. Bernie Sanders at 31%, Joe Biden at 20%, Bloomberg at 14%, and Elizabeth Warren at 13%. And next we have a couple of Change Research polls. These are polls that gave a lot of Democrats some heart failure last night, considering how much Sanders is losing in the Virginia poll, but then how much Biden is losing in the Maine poll. But Virginia being a bit more of a key state with a lot more pledged delegates than what we're going to be getting out of the state of Maine. But Virginia here, a very positive sign for Joe Biden. Sample size of 510, taken after the surge that Biden was getting from that South Carolina primary result. He's bringing in 45%, followed by Sanders at 25%, Warren at 13%, and Bloomberg at 10%. With the other Change Research poll coming out of the state of Maine looking very positive for Sanders, a sample size of 507. Sanders at 43%, Biden at 24%, Warren at 16%, Bloomberg at 10%. And now the next three polls are all from Atlas Intel. This first result is coming from the state of California, a sample size of 727 likely voters. Bernie leading the way at 34%, followed by Joe Biden at 26%. Elizabeth Warren and Michael Bloomberg are each at 15 percentage points respectively. And if this is what actually happened in California, with the top four candidates statewide all getting above that 15 percentage point threshold, which is now very possible with a number of these candidates that have stepped aside, making it more doable, then Bernie Sanders won't be able to run away with the pledged delegates out of that state. Of course, 415 pledged delegates are up for grabs there in California. And the more candidates that get above 15%, the less that any one particular candidate will be able to run away with the strong margin of those pledged delegates. The next Atlas Intel poll coming out of the state of Texas, sample size here of 486 likely voters. Another positive sign here for Bernie Sanders. He leads the way at 35%, followed by Biden at 25%, Michael Bloomberg at 16%, and Elizabeth Warren at 9%. And then the last Atlas Intel poll coming out of the state of Virginia, sample size of 545 likely voters. Biden, very strong poll for him out of the state of Virginia again here at 42%, Bernie at 28%, Michael Bloomberg at 11%, and Elizabeth Warren at 10%. Now, the next 28 polls, 14 of them are coming from Swayable, covering the 14 states that are going to be going on Super Tuesday, and then the same thing for Data for Progress. So we'll start with the Swayable polls here, and they go through alphabetical order through these Super Tuesday states. So we have Alabama here, sample size of 949, Biden with a significant lead up there at about 42%, followed by Bernie, who's around 20, Bloomberg around 18, and Elizabeth Warren around 10%. Arkansas, a sample size of 714. Bloomberg is actually a little bit more competitive in this instance with Biden at the top. Biden at about 28%, Bloomberg at about 25%, Sanders at about 17%, and Warren at 10% in the state of Arkansas. California, sample size of 3,388, Bernie leading the way at about 29%, Biden at around 21%, Bloomberg at 19%, and then Elizabeth Warren around 10%. Colorado, another pretty solid sign here for Bernie Sanders, a sample size of 921. He's at around 29%, Biden at around 20%, Bloomberg at 19%, and then Pete Buttigieg no longer in the race, but then you have Elizabeth Warren there at about 12%. Very positive sign here for Sanders in the state of Massachusetts, where Elizabeth Warren is the sitting senator. She's actually in 4th place in this instance, sample size of 917. Sanders at 27%, Bloomberg at around 18%, Joe Biden at around 17%, and then Warren at about 15%. Kind of interestingly, out of the state of Maine actually has Michael Bloomberg leading the pack, a sample size of just 209, so a bit larger of a margin of error. Bloomberg at about 28%, Sanders at around 27%, Biden about 21%, and then Elizabeth Warren at 11%. In the state of Minnesota, a sample size of 1,472, Sanders leading the pack at 27%, Klobuchar no longer in the race, Biden at about 20%, Bloomberg at around 14%, and Warren at about 8%. North Carolina, a sample size of 1,209. Biden very strong here at up around 36%. Bernie Sanders around 23. Bloomberg about 18. And then Warren is around 10%. Oklahoma, sample size of 472. We have a pretty strong result here for Joe Biden up there around 38%. Sanders around 26. Warren at around 13. And Bloomberg around 11. Tennessee, a sample size of 1,527, a bit closer than I would expect in the state of Tennessee, where you have Biden just 1 percentage point ahead of Sanders, 28 to 27, Bloomberg at 17, and Warren around 9. In the state of Texas, very close and competitive at the top, a sample size of 1,378, Bernie at around 28%, Joe Biden around 27, Bloomberg at about 20, and Elizabeth Warren around 12%. In the state of Utah, another kind of a surprise here with Michael Bloomberg leading the pack, a sample size of 143, so a very large margin of error in this one, but you have Bloomberg at around 29%, Joe Biden around 27%, Sanders at 22%, and then Warren all the way down there at 6%. I would actually probably expect Sanders and Warren to do a bit better than what these numbers might be indicating in the state of Utah. Then going down to Virginia, sample size of 1,435. A strong poll here for Biden at around 36%, Sanders and Bloomberg each around 20%, with Warren at about 11%, and then Vermont, very strong for Bernie Sanders, up there around 48%. Very small sample size here of 147, very large margin of error, but not a big surprise to Sanders out there in front, followed by Warren and Bloomberg, who are each around 16%, and Joe Biden, who's around 11%. So those were the 14 polls coming from Swayable, and they were taken between the dates of March 1st through the 2nd, so after the South Carolina primary result kind of baked into the numbers in this instance. Now moving over to the 14 polls that we got from Data for Progress, starting with California, a sample size of 516 likely voters. Bernie Sanders leading the way at 32%, and second you have Biden at 25%, Bloomberg at 17%, Warren at 16%, in another instance where all the top 4 candidates are able to get past that 15 percentage point threshold statewide. Moving down to Texas, sample size of 300 likely voters. Biden, very close and competitive there at the top, leading 30% to Sanders, who's at 28%, then Bloomberg at 20%, and Warren, who is at 15%. North Carolina, sample size of 334 likely voters. Biden leading the pack at 36%, Sanders at 27%, Bloomberg at 18%, and then Warren at 14%. Virginia, this poll is 327 likely voters. Biden leading the pack at 39%, followed by Sanders at 24%, Bloomberg at 18%, and Warren at 17%. Massachusetts, 301 likely voters responding, with Warren leading the pack at 28%, followed by Sanders at 26%, Biden at 26%, and Bloomberg at 15%. Colorado, sample size of 464 likely voters. Sanders leading the pack at 32, followed by Warren at 21, Biden at 18, and Bloomberg at 16. Tennessee, sample size 368 likely voters. Biden ahead at 34%, followed by Sanders at 27, Bloomberg at 20, Warren at 15. Minnesota, sample size of 650, and in this one, Sanders leading the pack at 32, followed by Biden at 27, Warren at 21, and Bloomberg at 16. Alabama, 237 respondents. Not a big surprise to see Biden leading the pack here at 47%, followed by Sanders at 22, Bloomberg at 18, and Warren at 12. In Arkansas, the sample size is 300 likely voters. Biden at 36, Sanders at 23, Bloomberg at 22, and Warren at 15. Oklahoma, also a sample size of 300 likely voters, with Biden at 35, Sanders at 28, Bloomberg at 19, Warren at 16. The main sample size was 385 likely voters, Sanders at 34, Biden at 25, Warren at 20, and Bloomberg at 18. The Utah poll was actually a bit larger than a number of these Super Tuesday states at 622 likely voters, and this is a bit more in line with what I would expect more so out of Utah than what we had from the swayable numbers, with Sanders at 29, Biden at 23, Warren at 19, and Bloomberg at 17. And then Vermont, the sample size was 236, with Sanders at 57%, Biden at 16, Warren at 16, and Bloomberg at 8. And what's going to be pretty interesting in the state of Vermont is if Sanders can win so dominantly that none of the other candidates are able to get to the 15 percentage point threshold to be among the individuals that divvy up those pledged delegates. Now, Vermont does not have a lot of pledged delegates, just 16, but if some of these candidates are able to get above that 15 percentage point threshold, then it could end up being a case where Sanders maybe gets 8, 9, or 10 of those 16 pledged delegates as opposed to all 16 of them, something to keep an eye on. And all of these 14 Data for Progress polls were taken between the dates of February 28th through March 2nd. So again, a lot of that Joe Biden surge after his South Carolina primary victory kind of baked into a lot of these numbers that we're getting. So those were the 37 polls that I wanted to run through in today's video. Last night, I had made my predictions on who I thought was going to get first, second, and third place, respectively, across these Super Tuesday contests. If you'd like to check out that video for yourself, I'll have a link to it posted right down in the video description. Also, in the video that I made last night, I saw a number of you comment asking why I hadn't made my prediction for Democrats abroad. The reason is, even though they start voting today, they vote from the 3rd through the 10th, so it's a bit different than all of the other states that are going here on Super Tuesday that are voting today and having that vote end later on this evening. So I wanted to kind of get the results that we were getting here from Super Tuesday before going in and making that Democrats abroad prediction. Their vote might even be impacted a bit by what happens on Super Tuesday. So I'll be making a separate video for that, maybe lumping it in with the next batch of predictions. We'll see how all of that plays out over this coming week, but going to continue to release a ton of content through the rest of primary season, more polling updates, going over results, making predictions, tracking where the pledged delegates are. So if that's content that interests you, consider subscribing to the YouTube channel, and I hope to see you guys back here for my next video.